Rachel sat across from Lauren in their usual cozy booth at the cafe, a spot so familiar it felt almost like a second home. As she absent-mindedly stirred her coffee, a faint, almost wistful smile played on her lips, the kind that usually followed one of Lauren's light-hearted stories. But today, something about Rachel was different. There was a distant, unfocused look in her eyes, as if her mind had wandered somewhere far beyond their conversation. Lauren noticed right away. She knew Rachel too well to overlook the subtle shift in her expression. "All right, spill it," Lauren said, raising an eyebrow as she leaned in slightly. "What's going on with you and Mark?" Her tone was casual, maybe even teasing, but the sharp glint in her eyes told Rachel she wasn't going to let this slide. Rachel let out a slow breath, setting her spoon down with a soft clink against the saucer. There was a brief pause before she finally spoke. "Everything's fine," she murmured, though even she could hear the unconvincing edge in her own voice. "I mean, he's a great husband. We've been together, what, almost 7 years now." Her words trailed off as she traced slow, absent-minded circles along the rim of her cup. "But sometimes, I don't know, I can't shake the feeling that something's missing. Like, shouldn't there be more?" Lauren tilted her head slightly, curiosity flickering across her face. "More?" she echoed, her voice carrying a skeptical edge. "Are we talking about excitement? Passion?" Rachel met her gaze and hesitated before giving a small nod. "Yeah," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "That's exactly it. We're comfortable, and that's not a bad thing. But Mark seems completely content with how things are. And me? I don't know. I just feel like I need something. Something that makes me feel alive again." Lauren's expression shifted as intrigue sparked in her eyes. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if about to share a secret. "You know," she began, a playful glint in her eye, "I've been trying something new myself. Have you ever considered opening things up a little? Giving yourself the space to see other people?" Rachel's eyes widened, shock flashing across her face. "Wait, you're serious?" she asked, her voice slightly higher than before. Lauren didn't flinch. She simply nodded, unfazed. "Absolutely. My husband and I talked about it, and honestly, it's done wonders for us. It doesn't have to be anything drastic, just a little breathing room. You'd be surprised. Sometimes, it actually brings couples closer." Rachel leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. A part of her was intrigued, but another part, one she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge, felt a tight coil of anxiety in her chest. "But how would I even bring something like that up to Mark?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Lauren's gaze softened, but her words remained firm. "You just be honest. This isn't about him, it's about what you need. And who knows? He might surprise you. A little change might be exactly what your marriage needs." Rachel inhaled deeply, her gaze drifting toward the window as her thoughts spiraled. She had no way of knowing that this single conversation would completely alter the way she saw herself and her marriage. She hesitated for just a moment before leaning in, lowering her voice to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "So, how do I even start that conversation?" Lauren held her gaze with an almost knowing look. "Honestly, just be direct. Men appreciate that more than we give them credit for. If you try to sugarcoat it, he'll either get confused or assume something's wrong." Rachel bit her lip, her forehead creasing with worry. "But what if he thinks I don't love him anymore?" Lauren shook her head without hesitation. "It's not about loving him less. You're just asking for something that helps you feel like yourself again. If you explain it the right way, he'll understand it's about personal growth, not about him doing something wrong." Rachel exhaled slowly, letting the weight of those words sink in. "So, I tell him I want to feel more alive. That this isn't about us. It's about me needing something more." Rachel's voice faltered slightly as she glanced away, doubt flickering in her eyes. "But Mark's never been one for unconventional ideas. He likes things stable." Lauren reached across the table, giving Rachel's hand a firm but reassuring squeeze. "If he really loves you, he'll listen," she said, her voice steady. And if he's open to hearing you out, that's a good sign. It means he's willing to work through it, even if the idea feels different. Rachel took another deep breath, feeling her nerves twist and tighten inside her. More than anything, she hoped Mark would understand. The next evening, Rachel sat across from Mark at their dining room table, her heart pounding hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. She had rehearsed this conversation over and over in her mind, playing out every possible reaction, every response. But now that the moment had arrived, the words felt unfamiliar, foreign and uncertain. She forced herself to take a steadying breath and finally spoke. "Mark, there's something I've been thinking about," she began carefully, her voice measured but tinged with vulnerability. Mark glanced up from his plate, his expression calm and attentive. "What is it, Rachel?" he asked, his tone gentle, inviting. Rachel swallowed, her palms damp against the cool surface of the table. "I've been feeling restless," she admitted. "Not because of you. It's just something inside me. Like there's something else out there that I need to experience." Mark's expression softened slightly as he set his fork down, giving her his full attention. Rachel hesitated, searching for the right words. "I've been wondering if maybe giving each other a little more freedom could help. Not because I don't love you. I do. But because I think it might actually be good for us." She watched his face closely, anxiety gnawing at her, hoping he would understand. For a long, silent moment, Mark didn't say anything. His expression remained unreadable as he processed her words. Then, finally, he gave a slow nod, his voice steady, though there was something beneath it, something she couldn't quite place. "So, you're saying you want us to open things up?" Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She nodded, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Just for a while. Just to see what it's like. I really think it could help us." Mark held her gaze, his expression composed as he leaned back in his chair. "I see," he said evenly. "If that's what you need, Rachel, I won't stand in your way." A wave of relief surged through her, but beneath it, something else lingered. A quiet tension she hadn't expected. She had braced herself for resistance, maybe even an argument. Instead, Mark had taken it in stride, almost too easily. He folded his arms, his face unreadable as he studied her. Then, after a beat, his voice shifted slightly. "So, this freedom," he said, his tone measured. "I assume this goes both ways?" Rachel froze. A sharp realization hit her like a jolt. She had been so focused on her own need to explore that she hadn't truly considered how Mark might feel about it. She had assumed he would just accept it, that he would understand her longing for something more. But now, looking into his eyes, she wasn't so sure. "Well, yes, I suppose," she said hesitantly. "If that's something you'd want too." Her voice wavered just a little. Mark nodded slowly, his expression steady, still impossible to read. "Thank you for being honest, Rachel," he said finally. "I think I understand what you're asking." He exhaled, a slow, measured breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm okay with it. I want you to be happy." His voice was calm, too calm. Rachel forced a smile, but it felt thin, fragile. She had expected pushback, maybe even an argument. Instead, Mark had accepted it without hesitation. And that left her feeling strangely unsteady, as if she had lost control of the conversation she thought she had orchestrated. A part of her had wanted him to react, to show some kind of emotion that matched the weight of what they were discussing. But he didn't, and that, more than anything, unsettled her. "Thank you, Mark," Rachel murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "That really means a lot." Mark offered her a small smile, but there was something in his expression, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. It wasn't just agreement. It was as if he had made a decision of his own. That feeling stuck with her, settling beneath her skin like an itch she couldn't quite scratch. A few days later, Rachel and Lauren stepped into a neon-lit nightclub, the kind of place they hadn't been to in years. The deep bass pulsed beneath their feet, sending vibrations up through their bodies. People moved in rhythm to the music, bathed in flashes of colored light that cut through the dim space. The air hummed with an electric energy, reckless, intoxicating. And for the first time in a long while, Rachel felt alive. Lauren shot her a teasing grin. Well, look who finally decided to come out, she called over the music. How does it feel? Rachel laughed, though there was an unsteadiness to it. Honestly, I'm still trying to process it, she admitted. I told Mark, and he just agreed. No argument, no hesitation. He was so calm about it. Lauren raised an eyebrow. Wow, guess he's more open-minded than I thought. See? I told you he'd understand if you just explained it. Rachel nodded, but a small frown tugged at her lips. Yeah, but it was almost too easy. Like, no hesitation at all. Lauren chuckled, shaking her head. That's because he's already thinking about his own options too, she said matter-of-factly. Trust me, guys like to act cool, but he's probably already planning his own little adventure. Don't overthink it, Rachel. This is gonna be good for both of you. Rachel tried to push down the uneasy feeling stirring in her gut. She took a deep breath and forced a smile. And what about you? She asked, shifting the focus. Does your husband know you're here tonight? Lauren hesitated, just for a split second, before brushing it off with a shrug. Oh, he's off on some hiking trip with his buddies. We've got an understanding. No questions asked. Just trust. Rachel raised an eyebrow. So he doesn't care where you go? Or who you're with? Lauren laughed, waving off the concern. She grabbed Rachel's hand and tugged her toward the bar. Come on, Rachel. Honesty is great, but he doesn't need to know everything. This is about freedom. A flicker of doubt passed through Rachel's mind, but before she could dwell on it, Lauren had already ordered them a round of drinks. She lifted her glass, her eyes twinkling with excitement. To freedom and new adventures. Rachel hesitated for only a moment before clinking her glass against Lauren's. She took a long sip, the drink burning sweet and strong as it spread warmth through her chest, smoothing the edges of her nerves. She let herself sink into the moment. They laughed, weaving their way onto the dance floor, losing themselves in the music and the hypnotic energy of the crowd. Not long after, Rachel felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned, and her breath hitched slightly. Sean. She had known him for years, a colleague she'd always shared easy conversations with. But under the club's flickering lights, he looked different, more confident, more dangerous. Rachel, he said with a smirk. Didn't expect to see you here. She smiled back, an unfamiliar thrill sparking in her chest. I could say the same about you. Sean introduced his friend to Lauren, and soon the four of them were deep in conversation, laughing between rounds of drinks, the heavy beat of the music pulsing around them. With each sip, with each joke exchanged, Rachel felt the tension in her fade. She let herself relax, let herself be swept up in the moment. As the night wore on, the group naturally split off into pairs, each person drifting into their own little pocket of the crowded space. Rachel and Sean ended up in a quieter corner, their conversation turning more personal, more intimate. This feels different, Sean murmured, his voice low as the space between them shrank. I've never seen you like this before. Rachel felt a flutter deep in her stomach, a mixture of excitement and nerves. I guess I feel different tonight, Rachel admitted, her voice barely rising above the hum of the club. It was a simple answer, yet in that moment it felt completely true. Everything that followed seemed effortless, as if the decision had already been made long before either of them acknowledged it. They left the club together, laughter spilling between them as they stepped into the crisp night air. The city lights cast long, wavering shadows on the sidewalk, flickering like silent witnesses to what was unfolding. Neither of them hesitated. Neither of them questioned it. They just moved forward, as if this had been inevitable all along. A short cab ride later, they arrived at a small motel on the outskirts of town. No words were necessary. Their intentions were already understood. For Rachel, the night felt like stepping through a door into something entirely new. A taste of the freedom she had been craving, finally within reach. But when morning arrived and the first slivers of sunlight crept through the curtains, the thrill of the night had already begun to dull. In its place was something else. Something murkier, a mix of satisfaction and uncertainty. She dressed quietly, careful not to disturb Sean, who lay sound asleep beside her. She had done what she wanted, hadn't she? Chased the excitement, broken free from the monotony. Yet as she slipped out of the motel room into the cool, quiet morning, her mind drifted back to Mark. His calm, unreadable expression lingered in her thoughts, and for the first time she wondered if she had underestimated him. Rachel arrived home just as the house was settling into its usual morning stillness, but today that silence felt heavier, almost unnatural. By now, Mark was usually up, sipping his coffee, getting ready for the day ahead. But today the house felt different, empty. A ripple of unease crawled up her spine as she moved through the rooms. First the bedroom, then the kitchen, even stepping out into the backyard. Nothing. No sign of him. Frowning, she reached for her phone and dialed his number. After a few rings, he answered, his voice steady but distant. "Hey, Rachel. What's up?" Relief washed over her, but it was quickly shadowed by a flicker of guilt. "Mark, where are you?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "I didn't see you this morning." "I'm at the office," he replied, his tone detached. "A new project came in. It's going to keep me busy for a while. Probably through the weekend." Rachel exhaled, feeling an odd mixture of guilt and relief settle in her chest. "Oh, okay. I was just wondering since you weren't here." "Everything's fine, Rachel," he reassured her, though his voice lacked any warmth. "Just a lot to handle right now. I'll be home by dinner." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "All right, take care." The call ended, but the unease remained. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the house in a warm, golden glow, Rachel heard the familiar sound of Mark's footsteps at the door. She greeted him with a smile as he stepped inside, setting his briefcase down near the entryway. "Long day?" she asked, mirroring his tired smile. "You could say that," he murmured, his voice unreadable. Without another word, he headed straight for the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water with slow, deliberate movements. Rachel watched him closely, studying his face for any flicker of emotion, any clue as to what he was thinking. But his expression remained controlled, his demeanor almost too composed. Wanting to gauge where he stood, she carefully eased into the subject. "So," she began, keeping her tone light, "how do you feel about everything?" Mark looked up from his glass, raising an eyebrow. "Everything?" he repeated, his voice even. Rachel offered a sheepish smile, nerves creeping in around the edges of her composure. "You know, this whole open marriage thing," she began carefully. "Has it meant anything to you? Are you getting anything out of it?" Mark set his glass down, his fingers resting against the rim as he considered her words. "Honestly, I haven't had time to think about it," he admitted. "This project's been eating up all my energy. Maybe once things settle, I'll have a clearer perspective on that part of things." A flicker of disappointment ran through Rachel, though she quickly masked it with a nod. "Yeah, I get that," she said, keeping her voice even. Mark shrugged, then smoothly shifted the conversation. "But enough about me," he said, his tone suddenly more pointed. "What about you? Didn't you and Lauren go out recently?" Rachel's pulse quickened. For a brief moment, she considered telling him about Sean, just putting it out there. But the words refused to form. Instead, she kept it vague. "Yeah, just some drinks, a little dancing," she said with a casual shrug. "Ended up crashing at Lauren's place." She kept her tone light, but Mark's expression remained unreadable. "And how did it make you feel?" he asked, his voice calm, but there was something underneath it, something searching. "Is this really what you wanted?" Rachel hesitated. The truth slipped out almost before she could think. "Actually, yeah, Mark. I feel good," she admitted. "Like I have this energy again, this spark I haven't felt in years." For a split second, something flickered in Mark's eyes, a reaction just beneath the surface. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He nodded slowly. "Well, I'm happy for you, Rachel," he said, his voice measured. Rachel smiled back, but something about his quiet approval left her feeling off. She had expected something, defensiveness, maybe even jealousy, some kind of emotional response. But instead, his calm acceptance made her feel like she was missing something, like she had been outmaneuvered in a game she didn't even realize she was playing. Over the next few days, Rachel found herself constantly texting both Sean and Lauren, caught up in the rush of something new. Sean was flirtatious, effortlessly charming, full of excitement about their night together. He hinted at a party he was hosting over the weekend, something he promised would be unlike anything she'd ever experienced. He insisted she bring Lauren along, selling it as an event she wouldn't want to miss. Rachel was intrigued, but something in her hesitated. She needed more information. Dialing Lauren's number, she waited, a mix of nerves and anticipation twisting inside her. Lauren picked up almost instantly. "Hey, Rachel, you all set for tomorrow?" Rachel chuckled, though even she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. "Almost," she said. "I wanted to ask you about Sean's party. He's been hyping it up, but it sounds different." "Oh, it will be different," Lauren replied with a knowing laugh. "Sean throws the kind of parties people don't forget." Rachel hesitated for a beat, then changed course. "What about Mark?" she asked. "He's been acting so distant lately, burying himself in work. I can't tell if he's really okay with all this or just too distracted to care." Lauren let out a light laugh, though there was something in it, a teasing edge. "Oh, come on, Rachel. He's probably using work as an excuse. Maybe he's already making plans of his own." Rachel frowned. "You think so?" "Men hate admitting they're doing the same thing," Lauren said smoothly. "It's like they want you to believe they're above it all. Trust me, he's just keeping quiet about it." A flicker of something, jealousy, doubt, rose inside Rachel, but she swallowed it down. "Maybe you're right," she murmured. "I just wish he'd show something. Anything." Lauren's tone softened, though it still held that confident, almost dismissive reassurance. "Forget about Mark for a night," she urged. "Let yourself go. Trust me, you need this. Sean's party is exactly the kind of escape you're looking for." Rachel felt her curiosity stir again, the nervousness starting to shift into something more reckless. "All right," she agreed. Then, after a pause, she added, "But, Lauren, when you say fun, what exactly do you mean?" Lauren's voice took on a playful, mischievous lilt. "Let's just say, you might pick up a few new phrases." Rachel blinked, a mix of intrigue and embarrassment creeping in. "New phrases?" she repeated. "Like what? Ever heard of Milk Brothers? Or Captain's Wheel?" Rachel's brow furrowed. "Captain's Wheel? What's that?" Lauren laughed, the sound rich with amusement. "Oh, you'll see. Oh, you'll see," Lauren teased, her voice dripping with mischief. "Let's just say, it involves a little teamwork. Get ready for a night you won't forget." Rachel felt her pulse quicken, a mix of nerves and anticipation curling through her. The thrill of the unknown was intoxicating. This was exactly what she had been craving, and she was ready for it. By the time Saturday night arrived, Rachel had her story rehearsed. She told Mark she was heading out with Lauren, making it sound like nothing more than a casual girls' night. Mark barely glanced up from his laptop, his focus locked on the work that had consumed him for days. "Have fun, Rachel," he said absently. "Don't worry about me. I'll be buried in this project all night." A wave of relief washed over her. "All right," she replied, keeping her tone light. "Just don't overdo it, okay?" He offered a distracted smile, his eyes never fully meeting hers. As she stepped out the door, a rush of anticipation surged through her. Mark's calm indifference almost felt like permission, and for the first time in a long time, she was stepping into something unknown. Sean's house was even more impressive than she had imagined. A warm glow spilled from the backyard, reflecting off the shimmering surface of a pool. Music pulsed through the night air, blending with the hum of conversation and bursts of laughter. The moment Rachel and Lauren stepped inside, she realized the party was bigger and wilder than she had expected. Dozens of unfamiliar faces filled the space, drinks in hand, their energy infectious. Sean spotted them almost instantly, his grin widening as he waved them over. "Rachel, glad you made it." His voice carried easily over the noise, warm and inviting. He greeted Lauren with a quick hug before turning back to Rachel, his eyes gleaming. "By the way," he added with a chuckle, "the pool's fair game tonight. Did you bring a swimsuit?" Rachel blinked, caught off guard. "No, I didn't even know there was a pool." Sean shrugged, his smile never faltering. "No worries," he said, his tone playful. "Underwear works fine. Or," he smirked, throwing her a wink, "you can always go without. No judgments here." A flush crept up Rachel's neck. Lauren, unfazed, kicked off her shoes and tossed her purse onto a lounge chair. "Come on, Rachel," she called, grinning as she dove in with a splash. Rachel hesitated. Before she could overthink it, Sean pressed a drink into her hand. She took a sip, swallowing her nerves along with the alcohol. The atmosphere was intoxicating, light, carefree, humming with reckless abandon. It reminded her of college, of wild nights where rules didn't exist, where nothing mattered except the moment. The music thumped, bodies swayed, laughter came easy, drinks flowed, conversations blurred. And soon, Rachel found herself caught up in the energy of the night. What started as harmless fun quickly became something bolder. Laughter turned into flirtation. Playful dares escalated into something more intimate. People swapped dance partners. Hands lingered longer. Touches grew bolder. The boundaries Rachel had assured herself would stay in place began to shift. Lauren was in her element, seamlessly weaving into the wild energy of the night. Around them, the music swelled. The lights cast a hazy glow, and teasing turned into something more suggestive. Then, Sean was beside her, his arm draping lightly around her waist, his breath warm against her ear. "So, Rachel," he murmured, "ready for a new experience?" His touch was easy, familiar. His gaze held an invitation she had been flirting with all night. Rachel's pulse quickened. The party had pulled her in, wrapped her in its electricity. But now, standing on the edge of something more, she hesitated. She had spent weeks chasing this feeling, craving the thrill of something new. And yet, "I think so," she murmured, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. Around them, the crowd had begun to splinter, small groups drifting into quieter corners of the house. Rachel found herself surrounded by strangers, their voices hushed, laughter softer, the energy of the room shifting into something heavier, something more intimate. Across the space, Lauren caught her eye and raised her glass in a silent toast, as if to say, "This is it. Just let go." But suddenly, something inside Rachel shifted. The thrill she had been chasing, the excitement that had seemed so electrifying in theory, now felt different. The hands reaching toward her, the murmured encouragements, the warmth of Sean's body just inches away. It didn't stir the same rush she had expected. It wasn't excitement anymore. It was something else, something heavier. She took a small step back, drawing in a deep breath. "Actually, I don't think I'm ready for this. Not yet." Her voice was quiet but steady. A few people exchanged knowing looks, some nodding in understanding, others with the faintest glint of disappointment. Sean, to his credit, simply smiled. His fingers brushed lightly against her arm in a way that was almost reassuring. "That's okay, Rachel," he said gently. "Sometimes it just takes time." But Lauren wasn't ready to let it go so easily. "Come on, Rachel," she coaxed, amusement laced in her voice. "You were having fun. Just relax. You'll love it if you give it a chance." Rachel shook her head, her discomfort now unmistakable. "I really can't, Lauren. I need more time." Sean shot Lauren a knowing glance before squeezing her shoulder. "It's fine," he said smoothly. "Rachel should go at her own pace." Then, with a playful grin, he added, "Besides, I'm sure there are plenty of people here willing to keep you entertained." Lauren rolled her eyes but let it go, already getting swept back into the party. The night raged on, the energy only growing wilder. But Rachel no longer felt like she belonged. She slipped into an empty room, shutting the door softly behind her. For the first time all night, she could hear herself think. The muffled thrum of the party still pulsed from beyond the walls. But here, in this quiet space, it felt distant. She poured herself a glass of wine, took a slow sip, and let out a breath she hadn't even realized she was holding. And then, without meaning to, her thoughts drifted back to Mark. The way he had barely reacted when she told him about her night out. The unreadable look in his eyes. The calmness that hadn't felt like calm at all. Had she misunderstood him? Had she been so focused on chasing excitement that she hadn't seen what was right in front of her? A wave of doubt settled over her, heavier than the warmth of the alcohol in her veins. As the hours passed, the party began to wind down. The crowd thinned, the lights dimmed, and people trickled out in pairs or small groups, their voices softer now, more subdued. Lauren, still glowing with the high of the night, found Rachel sitting alone and nudged her playfully. "Hey, you good? You disappeared on me." Rachel forced a smile, but it felt fragile. "Yeah, She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "I don't think this is really my thing." Lauren laughed, shaking her head. "You just need a warm-up," she teased. "Next time you'll feel right at home." Rachel didn't answer, because for the first time she wasn't sure she wanted there to be a next time. By the time she left, the sun had started to rise, pale light creeping into the sky. The drive home was quiet, just the steady hum of the engine, the rhythmic flicker of passing streetlights. But Rachel's mind was anything but still. For weeks, she had convinced herself that this was what she wanted, that this was what she needed. But now, she couldn't shake the one question that had been gnawing at her since the moment she stepped into that party. What had Mark been doing while she was gone? And for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. When Rachel stepped into the house, she was greeted by a heavy silence. The darkness felt different tonight, thicker, colder. She sighed, assuming Mark had already gone to bed. But as she made her way upstairs, an eerie chill crept up her spine. Something was off. Her breath caught when she reached their bedroom. The bed was perfectly made, untouched. The entire room felt too neat, too empty. A knot tightened in her stomach as her gaze flicked toward the closet. A few of Mark's clothes were missing, the comforter from his side of the bed gone. Panic squeezed her chest. Then her eyes landed on the nightstand. A stack of papers sat neatly on top. Rachel stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached for them. And as she picked them up, her heart began to pound. The bold, unforgiving letters at the top of the page sent a jolt through her system. Divorce. The words stared back at her, cold and absolute, but her mind refused to process it. Her vision blurred, and a strangled whisper escaped her lips. This can't be happening. And then, suddenly, everything clicked into place. Mark's unsettling calm. The quiet nods when she had spoken about the open marriage. He hadn't been agreeing. He had been waiting. Her fingers fumbled for her phone before she even realized what she was doing. She dialed his number, her heart slamming against her ribs. Voicemail. She tried again. The call rang and rang. No answer. And just like that, Mark was gone. In the days that followed, Rachel's desperation grew. Voicemail after voicemail, text after text, each one more frantic than the last. But there was nothing. No response. No explanation. No closure. It was as if he had vanished completely. Then, finally, a message arrived. But it wasn't from Mark. The text came from his lawyer, cold, formal, impersonal. The message was clear. Mark wanted out. No conversation. No discussion. Just finality. And just when she thought things couldn't possibly get worse, they did. At work, Rachel noticed the shift immediately. The friendly nods, gone. The warm smiles, gone. Conversations halted when she walked by. Colleagues who had once greeted her with laughter now avoided her gaze. It didn't take long to find out why. Mark had gathered everything. Her texts with Sean, the photos, the party details. Somehow, Every piece of it had made its way into the company's whispers, spreading like wildfire. And her employer? Conservative, unforgiving. The summons to her supervisor's office came swiftly. Their expression was unreadable, but the disappointment in their voice was unmistakable. Rachel was informed that her conduct was under review. Her career, the job she had built, the reputation she had worked so hard for, was slipping through her fingers. And the nightmare was far from over. By the time her court date arrived, Rachel felt like a ghost moving through her own life. She sat in the courtroom, numb, as Mark's meticulous preparation unraveled before her. Evidence, private texts, photos, surveillance records. A private investigator had documented everything. Her outings with Lauren, her flirtations with Sean, even her presence at that party. It was all laid bare, dissected piece by piece. Nowhere to hide. The choices that had once felt exhilarating now seemed reckless. Mark hadn't been watching out of anger, not out of desperation, with precision. And now every single detail was being used against her. Her betrayal was no longer just their story. It had become a public spectacle. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Nothing was off limits. Her personal life was laid out for everyone to see. Her messages, the lies, the nights out. She wasn't just losing her marriage. She was losing everything. And then came the final blow. Her job? Gone. Sean? Fired. His reputation in ruins, his career wrecked alongside hers. And then, the one thing she hadn't seen coming. Mark had sent everything. To Matt, Lauren's husband. And the truth hit like a wrecking ball. Lauren's so-called understanding with Matt? A lie. He hadn't known. He hadn't agreed. And when he found out, he filed for divorce immediately. The fallout was swift. Friends turned their backs. Alliances shattered overnight. The once admiring circle that had cheered Lauren's boldness quickly abandoned her. Humiliated, furious, Lauren cut Rachel out completely, blaming her for everything, blaming Mark for everything. And just like that, Rachel was alone. The scandal spread like wildfire. Friends distanced themselves. Neighbors whispered. Even family, once supportive, now looked at her with quiet disappointment. Meanwhile, Mark? He became the picture of dignity. The wronged husband. The man who had handled his pain with quiet grace. And Rachel? She became the villain of the story. One evening, after days of silence, Rachel finally reached him. Mark agreed to meet. She needed to see him, needed to understand. They sat across from each other, the silence between them heavier than words could ever be. The weight of everything, the lies, the choices, the destruction, settled like an invisible barrier between them. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as she reached for his hand, desperation clawing at her chest. "Mark, please," she whispered, her voice trembling, barely holding together. "I made a mistake, a huge one. I thought this would bring us closer, help us understand each other better. I was only with Sean once, and at the party, I couldn't even go through with it." Her breath hitched. "Please, forgive me." Mark exhaled slowly, his gaze heavy. "Rachel," he said, his voice calm, steady, unreadable. "When someone suggests an open marriage, it usually means they've already made up their mind. The marriage was already broken. You just didn't realize it." Her heart clenched. "You weren't honest with me," he continued, his tone unwavering. "You wanted both worlds. You wanted to explore, but you didn't want to lose me." He shook his head slightly. "You kept secrets, Rachel. And that, more than anything else, is what broke us." She looked away, shame pooling deep in her chest. Because he was right. She had lied. She had hidden things. And in doing so, she had shattered the very foundation of their marriage. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted this to end cleanly," he admitted. "Maybe I went too far. Maybe it seems cruel." He met her gaze, his expression softer now. But there was no warmth, no anger, just finality. "But the moment you started keeping things from me," he continued, "that was the moment I knew we were done." Rachel's breath hitched, her chest tightening with the weight of his words. I don't think we can fix this, Mark said, his voice quiet, resolute. I just don't. And in that moment she knew. It was over. That night, as Rachel drove home, the world outside blurred into streaks of headlights and neon-lit streets. She had spent so much time chasing something new, something exciting, convinced it would make her feel alive. Instead, she had unraveled everything. Her marriage, her career, her friendships, her own sense of self. And now she had nothing. Choices have consequences. She had learned that the hard way. And sometimes, those consequences leave you with nothing but regret. As she pulled into the empty driveway, she closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. She didn't know if she would ever find forgiveness or peace. But for now, all she had was this moment, and the weight of everything she had lost.